it looks like we're going to a regional war, which is to say World War III. And when it comes, it will hit our populations like a wall of bricks. And they'll suddenly realize that the Yankees were right, that this U.S. imperial machine wants to swallow up the whole world. It's a Bond villain going down, and or better example, it's like freaking Hitler going down, and it's Clausewitzing the whole world.
I think these guys are also crazy enough that if they are really threatened in their existence, to start using nuclear weapons.
This unraveling of the Western order, which the U.S. seems to be cheering on and accelerating, I think it's a response to the decline of America's importance on the stage. And it's something that is a symptom of a wider malady, which is like the US is not the power it once was. The end game for them is not victory, it's the status quo. And that status quo is over, right? They can't be the high-tech economy they once were. They're not even gonna make sure if their planes are gonna land because of the Yemenis. And remember, the English-speaking ones who boast about it so much here, who live most of their lives here, they don't learn Hebrew. They can't learn languages. They're Westoids. Okay, Westoids, Anglophone Westoids don't learn languages, okay? The world comes to them. Like the reason why they say Hamas, is because they can't do the ha.
Exactly.
That we have.
Exactly.
We have a ha. Harikat al-Muslim, what is it? Harikat al-Muslimiyya al-Islamiyya, something? No, Islamic. Oh, Muqawama. It's like Harikat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, something like that. That's Hamas. That's like and they can't do the Harikat. They can't do the Ain, right? I think they have an equivalent. And all their Semitic philo-Semitism, their obsession with their own Semitic origins, they're fucking Westoids, man. Israeli society is so racist. I mean, they shoot their own thinking that they're Arabs.
Yeah,
that might be a good way to start off, is asking a question we used to ask just about everyone, which is basically, how did you become woke? Kidding, but how did you become awakened to the reality of the world in which we live when you, like I, grew up in North America, where this is not exactly the sort of knowledge or narrative that you get in school and the mass media, etc. So how was it that you were able to develop a perspective on the world that, in my view, is far more accurate than the mainstream in North America?
Well, I mean, I think I wonder about that, actually. Like I mean, the question to me, what the question I'm hearing is like, how did your media consumption over the course of your life change, and how did that reflect inside of you, right? And like, I think in some ways, like, this is a roundabout, like, annoying way to answer this question, but I think about it a lot, because like the texts we consume and the media we consume, they infiltrate us and soak into like the pores of our thinking. I mean, to an extent. And you can you can sort of adopt a more critical strategy. You can kind of believe everything you see, and and so for me, that the principal kind of root to that was the news. I've always been like a news guy, so I would read the news, which is to say, I would read like a prescribed set of like Western news mostly. And most of it digitally, obviously, but then, and a kind of smattering of independent stuff. And over time, especially like with my own, let's say, radicalization, because I was pretty liberal most of my existence. And you can basically, it's like my podcast is like my kind of tanky heritage. And like, you can hear my tankydom like evolve on the show. There are some people who've listened to the entire catalog, and so they know me better than I know me. It's disturbing. There's like a record of my own transformation.
Like it.
Yeah. So, but really, like the story in between of all that was detoxing from this media apparatus that we're all kind of under in the English-speaking world. Now, Kareem, I know you grew up in Holland, but you're also subject to that English-speaking world, partly because the Dutch are so good at English. and America dominates your country like it does all of Western Europe. And so like you're more or less in the same media sphere. And I think from what I can tell, the Dutch media sphere is just as like ass-eatingly imperialist as ours. And it feels like almost like an analog to the Canadian one, because at the end of the day, neither of our countries have sovereignty, true sovereignty over their foreign policy, at least. And how that infiltrates into like the media framework is very, very profound. So it's interesting, you know, we're both dominated by the same country, and that reflected in the media culture. And so in some ways, you know, it's probably the same. I imagine it's the same story with you guys, is that you really have to just say goodbye to the liberal media hegemony that you just granted by way of osmosis, because that's all you saw on TV. And so that was really like my break, you know, was kind of like, oh, I don't need to read this stuff every day. It's all the same. And, you know, social media plays a big role in that. I think Telegram evolved for a certain point. I feel like Telegram's introduction into our region, into the Middle East, which is to say North Africa, MENA, whatever, or West Asia, like who cares, whatever you call it. It's not who cares, you should call it West Asia. But for me, there was a kind of very strong sort of Telegram to Twitter pipeline that I started consuming, and going back and forth between like Arabic and Persian sources, because I can read headlines, at least in Arabic. Can I delve into the articles? Not really, but I can kind of figure out, because I did 3 years, and that's basically all I have is like sentence power. Like I can't do anything else. So that way was able to sort of congeal a new worldview. And really, if there was one issue, it was Syria. Syria was let's say, a portal to tankydom for me. That was kind of like, wow, like the things they have an ability to to matrix you, basically, to use a really stupid analogy. Sorry, but like the analogy is like they can really create a media environment out of the world. Like they can create a media using their media power. They can create a kind of media world for you in which you consume, in which you sit in, and then they even bring in, as the 2010s proved, like a whole army of sort of native voices who amplify and justify and sort of sprinkle legitimacy on all their like imperial machinations. And as Syria is the test. I mean, they threw the kitchen sink at Syria in every way possible. It was the biggest. I hold that it's the biggest psyop of all time, until Gaza, maybe, until this genocide, maybe. But even then, just not reporting on news is a lot easier than erecting this entire insane narrative artifice. And so for me, probably it was that, if anything. If you were talking about like, I don't think, wokeness means like different things to stuff, but in terms of like, you know, the anti-imperialist struggle or whatever worldview, that was definitely something for me. And to this day, like it's still a weird location in my brain. I mean, I visited there, and so I knew some people. Obviously, I didn't spend a ton of time there, so it had some personal meaning to me. But really, it was what it taught me about how media works, and how, you know, compradorism works, and how dirty wars work. And it's really like a textbook on imperialism. So yeah, that's probably the best answer. I mean, Iran is related in all of this. I mean, in Hezbollah too, in how both of those sort of national cases of resistance are drawn and kind of, you know, rendered as enemy states or called terrorist. And like that I knew about, obviously, in the abstract. I had known, you know, that the West calls everything it doesn't like terrorism. That's obvious to anyone. But the extent to which that machine is able to sort of grow into our media system, into our intellectual sphere, I mean, it's amazing. Even with and it's like the internet amplified their power. Sorry, my fan came on. Let me turn it off. Sorry. So, oops. Go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up. I'm curious. Well, first of all, I need to criticize you for, oh my God, you denied like Canadian agency and Dutch agency.
Dutch agency. You mean the CIA?
But no, actually, my follow-up question was more like, if you were coming from basically a more liberal information diet, how did you avoid the fate that seemed to befall lots of people kind of on the left in the US about Syria? Because after I left New York, I heard through trustworthy friends that there was a big part of the kind of erstwhile left that fully bought into the story of we have to support the rebels against the
Al
Syrian
Qaeda.
government,
Yeah.
human rights, and
Yeah.
blah blah blah, protect the agency of the Syrians or whatever the fuck they were saying.
Yeah.
How did you see through that, or avoid that, like adopting that narrative?
Well, first of all, I didn't. To be honest, I didn't. Like at first, I bought it too. I completely bought it all, hook, line, and sinker. And really, it was my you can hear it in my podcast. Probably it was probably like my reading around the show, and something for me. Maybe it also now I'm like thinking about it out loud, and really it was leaving academia too. Probably had a big role because I wasn't surrounded every day by obsequious libs or comprador agents, which is basically the entire humanities and social sciences. It's like one of those two, like neo-lib dorks, lanyard class, like, oh, let me create a democracy index made out of mustard seed, whatever, and frothing at the mouth regime change, like losers who are just making a career from themselves, speaking about all these like liberal coded, boring, nothing burger concepts, agency, whatever, and subverting
Human
the
rights.
paradigm. Yeah,
Rights.
like that's like libs. But you know what, guys? I was in a liberal institution. I was in their house. Of course, that's what I expect. Oh, I'm shocked. I'm shocked to discover gambling in this casino. Like this is what it's for. And so for me probably was getting out of that bubble, and what I did was specifically was kind of literary studies, a certain sort of genre of 19th century and kind of novelistic, kind of Marxist inflected. So there were a ton of trots and there were a ton of libs, which is to say there were a ton of libs. And because libs and trots agree foreign policy, which is not a word, but I just made it up. And that was probably my biggest political inflection point in academia. And then when I left I got into the podcast verse, and I was always listening to podcasts throughout like the 2010s, but I really got into them when I left academia, because guess what? I had nothing to do, and I was a stay-at-home son. No, not really, but I was a stay-at-home guy, which is to say I was unemployed. And I was just like feeding my own brain with whatever sort of I could get my hands on. And then Trump was elected. Now I'm like thinking back. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Trump was elected, and then the liberal media got a whole bunch more radical, I remember. And probably, and then that was from that point on, like 2016, 2017 is when I was like really consuming a lot of podcasts. Like podcasts were my life, in a bad way. I guess in a good way too, now reflecting, but that was the kind of trajectory and to get me to my show. And my show was then through the people on my show and also the interactions with my listeners, because that's part of it too, that I started to learn more, that I started to kind of rethink my own assumptions. Like I would always make DPRK jokes, not always, but occasionally. I would make the same lib DPRK joke, which is like, oh, American media is just like DPRK media. Like I would do that thing, like, and like slowly over time, I was like, wait a minute, like don't do that. That's you did one unit of liberalism there, buddy, because you collapsed all these different things into this
Internalized imperialism. I call
yeah,
it
exactly,
internalized
yeah.
imperialism.
Like the things that they teach you to do in their prose, in their interviews, the things that they excel at. This is like the lib media class. This infects you. This like gets into like the sinews of your brain. At least it did for me. I mean, obviously it does for a lot of people. And so that's kind of my villain arc, is from academia to my own show. And yeah, and then there has also been 2020 and the sort of the consequences of COVID and the blow up in podcasts and the infinitely more options that podcasts. So, and then the move to video that kind of trickled in a few years later. People upgraded their recording equipment. Me too, also. So there's been a big transformation in media throughout this whole time. And so and I've kind of ridden that to, right now, to like where we're sitting. So that's probably the best way to tell that story.
Yeah, well said. And when you talk about the similarities between Canada and the Netherlands, I always say we have actually a lot of similarities. I think in particular because the Netherlands, just like Canada, is highly convinced it's one of the most tolerant and liberal societies in the world,
Exactly.
while it's one of the most colonialist,
Yeah.
imperialist, racist countries you've
Yeah.
ever been, and totally convinced that they're so liberal and open, which they are absolutely not. And I think, I don't know if were you born in Canada, Sina?
No, I was born in Iran, but we left when I was very young, and we grew up I grew up. I was in Turkey for several years, and then we eventually emigrated to Canada.
So then you probably can relate to that if you grow up with one leg in your own country as an outsider.
Yeah.
You look at your country in a very different way. And me growing up in the Netherlands, it was actually just since I was young a very radicalizing process. For me it was actually 9/11. 9/11 really radicalized me. That was the moment I started to see the world in a different way, but not where we are now. I must admit, I thought I knew what imperialism was. I thought I knew what colonialism was. I read about it. I heard about it. Iraq, oil, George Bush, all that stuff. I mean, the Bush years, my God, those were some terror years. Those were some very, very scary years. We almost forget about that. But Palestine was happening now in Palestine. And we had Libya, don't get me wrong. We had Syria. I mean, we had many of these terrible things. But Palestine actually showed me that the depravity of the Western Empire, of the colonial mindset, is actually worse even than I thought. And it has, in my brain, it has rewritten history, I always say, in the sense that I already knew colonialism was depraved and terrible. But now I see with my own eyes, it's even more depraved and more disgusting and evil than I ever thought it was. Because you cannot imagine that. It's something, even if you think about history, history was terrible, the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, terrible thing. You can never really tangibly remember how bad it was, or look back in history how bad it was, until you see with your own eyes, live streamed in high definition, the absolute evil these Western colonialists have in their mind and their behavior. And that has really doubly radicalized me now as an adult man after 9/11, when I was a young guy, young boy, I could even say. Do you agree, Sina?
Yeah, I mean, 9/11 was this incredible, you look back now, it's what, almost, it's 25 years, 25 years next year, I guess. And it was a mass psychosis. And it was one of the biggest psyops, probably a big psyop. We didn't have that language back then, or we didn't use it, at least. I certainly didn't use it. And this insane thing where two planes took out 3 buildings. Like, let me do the math. Let me do the math on that. Let me see. So one plane, fine. And then there's a third building that just seppukus itself. Okay. Like,
and
why?
Straight, perfectly
down.
straight.
And so then you think about that, and you think about the fact, you're like, 9/11 was an inside job. So that means they destroyed their own, towers, and then they erected this mass hallucination event of Al-Qaeda and everything, or maybe it was a kind of combination of the both, where they knew Al-Qaeda was planning this attack, and they rigged these buildings with explosives for this planned demolition, which is basically what I've come to the conclusion now. And then you had this convenient enemy, which helped you launch what has probably been one of the most violent military campaigns, undeclared regional wars in human history. Which is to say, it's hard to even, since the invasion of Afghanistan in October 2001, there has been a wave of imperial violence stretching over the entire zone. Like the American empire went for all the marbles and it never said it was doing it. The only hint that you got was Wesley Clark giving it away with his like, 7 countries in 5 years thing. But that was their plan. And we've watched in our adult lives, we've watched that plan unfold. And the psyops, the role of the media is to disconnect all of these different projects, which are all connected to this villainous machine called the US empire with its sort of tentacles. And its job is to place those tentacles separate from each other, grow them in some strange terrarium, and label them civil war, civil war, civil war, civil war, right? With the exception of Iraq, which was like a war of revenge. Same with Afghanistan, like, anti-terror war, anti-terror. Like this is their job, and this is what they've been doing. And the fact that Gaza, the phase of this Holocaust, of this Gaza Holocaust that it represents in that larger imperial war, that it's lost on people, even on our side, that they can't connect the dots to say like this is an escalation of a civilizational war that has this kind of caged in population that it wants to use as a testing ground for weapons, as also like what it can do on the international stage, which is everything it wants. And also how to sell it as, we're doing this and that. And then they don't even need to sell it anymore. They're saying it. We're doing ethnic cleansing. We're doing, which is fine. And our Western media apparatus is just saying, okay, that's fine. And they're going on business as usual. And on top of that, they're suppressing any kind of serious representation of that violence. So Gaza has disappeared. They disappeared it after stoking up a genocidal rage. Our liberal media class completely abandoned it, with the notable exceptions, and then they flay them alive, those ones who dare to walk away. So we're in a bleak moment right now, media-wise, but it's also evident to everybody how this game is fixed. And it will be evident next time when they start another, we're concerned about human beings in this country and we're worried for their human rights, because they're still going to do it. They're still going to be they're still going to have those shameless scams where they pretend to care about one person while murdering 100,000 in Gaza. So this is why we're here. This is why shows like ours exist. And we provide an environment for, the terminally, like, the poor souls who have escaped the matrix. Again, not a very good analogy. I can't believe I'm making it, but it's just, I'm reaching for it right now, because you have to break away. There's a moment where you have to say like, wow, this is like a fictionalized space, this Western media sphere. And it's like this big cartoonish, like hall of mirrors, like erected for you to endlessly run around. And then you, using social media, produce the content itself, because so much of our news, especially at like the local thing, is, hey, this is what happened on the internet yesterday, right? Which is like they provide free content. So I mean, that's my kind of global overview of how this machine works.
Yeah, I think one of the uses of asking people for their kind of like ideological development is to remind people who are now aware of how things actually work, that they didn't always have this understanding. So when you're dealing with people that have not yet developed that same understanding, try to keep that in mind, that we were all at some point not aware of the reality. And instead, we believed in the common mythology that you're inculcated with in any of the societies represented among us three. And so, try to have a little patience, because I think the way our brains, the kind of like default state is to kind of, hear something that we find offensive, ignorant, and kind of attack the other person for their moral failing, while forgetting that we were guilty of the exact same moral failing back before we had the knowledge, the information that got us to change our perspective. But that's a kind of, pedagogical point. I wanted to follow up on something you said about the media in North America kind of ignoring Gaza now. I'm blessedly free of that media ecosystem unless I choose to delve into, but I haven't recently. Is that what's going on in Canada and the US? The media coverage of Gaza has just kind of dropped. For a long time now. Like
it's an afterthought. Like, it's just not newsworthy. They have decided, and they always decided this, that Zionist terror and Zionist genocide is simply not newsworthy. So the fix is in. Like, the kayfabe. So, like, I always use this word kayfabe, which is like this Carney term of like this sort of fictional narrative universe around something that everybody understands is not really the case, but performs it anyway. So the classic thing is professional wrestling. So you don't break kayfabe, which is to say, like, hey, you're not my sworn enemy, you're my buddy. Let's go, you know. And then these two sworn enemies are found in a car doing coke together, and then kayfabe is broken, like the famous story with the Iron Sheik and Hacksaw Jim Duggan. I'm sorry, this is in my brain; it has to come out. But it's more like that kayfabe now is gone, and it's just pure silence. Like, there doesn't have to be. I mean, they try to bring it back, like this thing in Washington. They're trying to bring it back, the kayfabe, which is these lives matter more, and you have to believe that. And if you don't go along with that, you're doing blood libel or anti-Semitism. That's the thing. That doesn't work at all anymore. It only works to their own base, right? It used to police people, and it still polices, like, you know, useless media libs and the you know, like barnacle, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the barnacles of, you know, like sock dems or whatever. It still works on them, but those people are relevant. Like the Mamdani guy in New York City, who's running for mayor, I think, of New York City. He was like, "Oh, Israel has a right to exist," and "Oh, I'm shocked," and whatever. And that's the kayfabe. He's forced to be part of this kayfabe, where you're supposed to say, "Oh, those lives are more important than all those other lives." And thankfully, we're not part of that kayfabe. We're not welcome into it. And the harder they kayfabe, the more people who see what's happening come to sources like us. So it's that is basically, I would say, what's going on. Like, you watch the news, it's a little clip, maybe a bomb dropping, but definitely, like, I saw something today on the news, oh, Israel's bombing Lebanon, you know, and of course, like, the Israelis always get the last say. And yeah, guess who owns the media station? A Zionist. Like, this is their soft power is second to none. So we live under the realm of their soft power, which is their information power, their cultural power, their hold over institutions. So that's something that, like, we contend with. But thankfully, you know, they can't hold soft power over, like, my streams, at least not yet. They probably will try to eventually, but, like, the internet provides us a kind of circumnavigation system or whatever around this, or we can circumvent this, which is to say, but it is even now, it is shocking the degree that even their shamelessness of, like, they're still doing regime change stuff at the same time. They're still pretending to care about XYZ in country XY, like, you know, whatever, right? Like, that's still what they're doing. And that is, to me, is like the most shameless thing. Like, at least just fill your stuff up with trivial, like, oh, look at this cat who was found, you know, like, saved in a pool by some local whatever. They're sent to feed you the lies of, like, oh, it's actually not so bad out there. But they can't hold that forever. It looks like we're going to a regional war, which is to say World War III. And when it comes, it will hit our populations like a wall of bricks. And they'll suddenly realize that the Yankees were right, that this U.S. imperial machine wants to swallow up the whole world. It's a Bond villain going down. And, you know, or better example, it's like freaking Hitler going down, and it's Clausewitzing the whole world. And Zionism is just one of the spears that it can throw at the world. And that's the world we live in, man. Like, that's it. Like, that's our media environment. Like, they're ghouls. Our liberal media are just ghouls. They're monsters. And they're, you know, they deserved our contempt for the rest of our lives. Like, literally, you should be so contemptible of these people. You see them, you should get your phone out and yell at them. And they can't stop you from yelling at them. No, at least not yet. They can't. So you can always yell at them. That works. They're like the most cowardly people on the planet. They'll run from you like they're leaving, like, Chernobyl zone. It's crazy. It's because they can't stand anyone questioning them, because they're all heartless, like, just cardboard cutout human beings anyways. So yeah, that's it. It's simple as that.
It probably that is a kind of discussion I hear all the time when people. So you have one group of people who always says the change will come from the global south, And other people will say nothing will change until the people within the West will really wake up. And I'm starting to have my doubts that in the West people are actually have the ability to wake up to such an extent that they will rise up. That we will get a revolution and things will change. I really think indeed that change needs to come from the outside, but there's a problem on the outside as well, Sina, that is very much related to what you just said about when we talk about the media and the way we are all indoctrinated with all that nonsense and bullshit. Like, for example, also in the Netherlands, by the way, it's like the genocide doesn't even exist. Really, it's like the world just goes on and it doesn't even exist. It's really shocking. I was there recently. But I think also what is very important, and probably that issue is also a huge issue in Iran, and you maybe know more about that, is that a lot of people outside of Europe, outside of the West, I should say, are also mentally colonized just like Westerners, because they all consume all that crap that comes from the West, whether it's algorithms on Twitter, whether it's Joe Rogan, whether it's CNN, whether it's what's that guy, Jordan Peterson. How many fans that guy has around the world is insane, especially Arab world. You're shocked, man. You would be shocked. And that's so important to me. As a social psychologist, I have a couple of grants. I'm really interested in what we call colonial mentality. It's that kind of internalized colonialism, that kind of still that idea that the West that the West is liberal and the West will save the world and the West is modern and civilized and all that kind of stuff. And I'm still baffled why most of the world hasn't cut off Facebook, Google, Twitter, just like China. Why are they still relying on that Western crap when everybody can see around the world what the West is doing? When are people waking up? You know what I mean? Because you can be a Westerner right now and travel all around the world and you're still treated like some kind of special what can I say, somebody you throw the red carpet out for, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, because they still retain their economic power over the global South. That hasn't changed, and it's definitely worsened since COVID because of like the flow of money between these two unequal halves. And yeah, like the few sovereign powers that try to sort of change that situation, they're starved, they're bombed, they're strangled, they're they have hexes thrown upon them. I mean, we know the countries, and even then they still survive and they still resist. And Iran is one of them. I will say that the story, I didn't grow up in Iran. I talked to Iranians in Iran. Sure, my family members. Really, that's about it. And I'm not in the business of representing Iran because it's not my job to do that. Like, it's not, and I couldn't do it anyways. It's ridiculous. 90 million people in a country. But I do think what I do know is that Iranians have had a, let's say, tortured relationship with Western ideals, which is to say, with the facade of Western civilization. Iranians have been narcissistically trapped in their, not narcissistically, but kind of trapped in that kind of I don't know, Ghostbusters gun ray of oh, this is the most amazing place in the world. The streets are paved with gold in Beverly Hills. Paris is the center of the universe. I want to go to London. Like, I come from, actually, my own family is an Anglophile family. My grandfather, and I shit you not, he worked for the Anglo-Iranian oil company. Okay, he worked for, actually, I even think he even worked for the Anglo-Persian oil company because he was that old. He worked as like a page boy maybe, and then they changed it to Iranian, and then they changed it to the National National Iranian Oil Company, and I'm pretty sure he was there when it was like, I have to double check. I know he was definitely there before it was nationalized, and like they sent him to a course in England in like the 50s and 60s. And he always would tell us the story of how he went to like a beach. This is so fun. I don't know why I'm sharing this. Oh, rest in peace, Granddad. He went to a beach somewhere and like he took off his shirt and he was a hairy Iranian guy. And everybody was like, oh my God, there's a bear. There's a bear on the beach. So I don't know. I told that story because my own, like her generation, like his kids also adopted this Anglophilia, and not just like Anglophilia, but like American philia, where most of them, 4 out of the 6 of them, migrated to America and grew up there, raised their kids there, never moved back. Some of them have never even visited again. And that is like a trajectory that a lot of Iranians follow, but they follow it for a reason. Okay, this is something that I need to like stress for people, that like the class of Iranians you meet in the diaspora are in the West for reasons. They're there because the West appeals to them to a certain degree. Most of them are there by choice, which is to say, I don't think you have full agency in a society to say, I am going West. And it's because there's lots of economic, social things that push them out, or they feel they can't live there. That's up to whatever reason. For my family, it was war. Okay, that's what we were escaping. We were in a war. We were living on the border. We were close to the border with Iraq. We were getting bombed. It was time to go, and that's our trajectory. And so, but the thing is, the vast majority of Iranians live in Iran, and those people are not on the websites that claim to have millions of Iranian subscribers, right? And so you go on Twitter, and you're confronted with 300 million Iranians, and somehow there's more Iranian accounts than there are Iranian people on the planet, and they all are saying we want this, we want that, to the point where, like, I think during the Mahsa Amini stuff, there were like 350 million hashtags or something. That, like, the insane amount of astroturfing, right? The astroturfing of Iranian like digital media politics is so vast that the difference between the actual number of Iranians and how they sort of articulate themselves in the English speaking, but also there's a whole Persian speaking social community. They're on Instagram, they're on Twitter, more on Instagram than Twitter, actually. I don't know about TikTok, actually, but this is to go to your point about like why they haven't banned them. I think if they actually ban them, they pretend ban them, right? They can't, they're filtered in Iran, but which it may have even ended. I'm not sure. I got to double check with my.
They even have BBC in Iran, right? They even have a BBC over there.
There's a BBC Persian, and that's based in London, and they're not allowed. I think they're not allowed in Iran anymore. But BBC Persian originally helped with the overthrow of Mossadegh, to tell you what kind of information source. Like they did this thing that, the time is now precisely 12 or something, and that was the code to local gusanos to sort of get into action or something. I have to look up that story, but essentially, like, we know this about BBC, that it's an organ of British imperialism, one of the most important. It was the first sort of Anglo media organ to reach around the world, and with it comes all the credibility, and anyone who sort of wants to hear that, wants to sort of believe in that voice, that English voice, that is like, for some colonized people, and Iranians too, who are not colonized per se, that is like, that's manna from heaven, man. That's like dad speaking to you from heaven. That the most, like, a British accent for some people, like, imbues some, like, they think that like God is speaking. So this is a colonized mindset.
And that is, Sina, that is when monsters like Churchill suddenly become a god. You know what I mean? I mean, these are such savage, depraved monsters. So, somebody like Churchill, and yet when these people hear him speak, they think like, oh, a British person. And it's the same with that. It's the same with that. What's the name of that Zionist freak that was on Joe Rogan's show?
Douglas Murray.
Douglas Murray. So where are you going? Have you ever been? Have you ever been? And there are a lot of people, and probably the guy himself as well, who really fall for that crap. He's probably seeing himself on that show and really thinking, wow, I sound so colonial and intellectual.
I'm almost relieved to hear that other people have the same malady, because I thought it was just the United Statesian problem, where we hear a British accent and think like, oh, this guy must be smart.
Yeah, that's an old that's a crazy coup that the Brits pulled. That somehow
that's an indoctrination, man.
Yeah, I mean, that's like there is something kind of makes sense about it from like the philological view, is that like when an English person speaks, that's like the source, right? Like that's the source of this language, the culture, whatever. But we know that English is not a national language, that it's this global, global basically it's not a global beast that exists in all these different contexts that have different versions of it. And that, but for whatever reason, branding, and partly and really to do with BBC and the historical legacy of the British Empire, really, it comes down to is that that's drawn up as, oh, the most exotic thing. So they use their, like Germany does this with Goethe Institute. The Brits have British Council. What did the French have? I forget the name of the French one. Institut Français, right? Or something like that. Alliance Française. Yeah, exactly. Alliance Française. They have that, and these are their cultural arms. Obviously, they're more than likely used for intelligence purposes, practically, to like recruit and pinpoint, and also, but I imagine the majority of the people just want to go because they're enamored with this thing, and all to them. I mean, if Iranians in Iran want to point themselves west, what am I going to say? I'm going to be like, oh my God, what are you doing? You betrayed your people. Like 90 million people. What you can't worry about that. But when you combine that westward view with an intense, decades-long media campaign to convince you that your government is wrong and your government is vile, and maybe they have those feelings on their own for their own native reasons. Like you can't take that away from Iranians in Iran too. Like everybody hates their government. Iranians have a right to hate their government too. But does that necessarily mean they're about to overthrow them tomorrow, which is what like the classic regime change sort of standard line is? No. If Iranians were going to have a revolution, they'll have one, and that's it. And that's about it. But in the meantime, they do have this remarkable ability to rain all this bad news upon Iranians. And I've seen it work on my own relatives. And one aspect of it is that we don't probably talk enough about is Turkish soft power. That like Turkish soft power is a vehicle for a lot of imperialist propaganda. It's safe to say that like Turks are an important mediator between let's say resistant countries, and especially in the Muslim world, because of their size and the size of their economy and their resources. And they're like an important mediating force between them and their own masters, the West and NATO, which is like principally the people who control Turkey, at least in the sense in their foreign policy, and who determines, like where Turkish, foreign policy priorities are. And of course,
who never allow them in the EU, by the way, who never allow them in the EU because they're never good enough. They're always Muslims. They will always stay Muslim, European.
Yeah, but you can purge them for their labor, for their source of cheap labor, which is historically what they were, or at least have been, and other sources of it have popped up in the meantime. But yeah, like this is the world we live in is it's like that meme, you have no idea how bad it is. It feels like that. It's like that's, and like the more like immersed you are in this like tankyverse that we're in, like unfortunately the bleaker you realize it is, because our populations are not ready for the collapse that's coming. That like the US dollar, it's not going away anytime soon, but they are trying to make it irrelevant. And the trade wars in combination with like sort of all these like cultural wars that are getting to be insane, like the US going to war with its own elite institutions just because to own the libs, like bringing down your own empire to own the libs. I mean, that's where we are at this point, or like helping to bring down its pillars. And so like that's something that will accelerate. I mean, Americans are already fixing a decline. There's a decline here. The economic decline is real. The power of, and also the kind of fiction of, the U.S. gentility to us here, which is to say that, we are this thing of Canada, Mexico, USA. This is like one economic system, right? That's linked. This is like one economic beast that's linked through natural resources and labor and roads and extractivism, right? And like these are flowing between these three places, like, and a circulatory, like through a circulatory system. And the fact that this dude wants to do his best to like set up as many fucking clogged arteries as possible, like his own like disgusting body, is testament to the fact that the US empire has reached an impasse, that it can't do what it traditionally did to continue its unstymied growth, right? That it enjoyed when we were kids in the 90s. That it's hit a wall in Eastern Europe called Vladimir Putin, and it's hit a wall in the Middle East called the Axis of Resistance and Yemen on one side. That it's hit a wall in Latin America, which is it can't get around Venezuela, which is a pain in its side, which has a huge number of resources. I mean, they've assiduously worked to starve these countries, and it's worked. It's driven out millions of people from all those respective countries, and it's hurt them. And when it didn't work, they just used war, which is what they did in Yemen. Proxy war that they called a civil war, but really it was a proxy war, and this is now a crisis, and the biggest block, which is in the east, right, which is China, right, that it's hit a wall, that it can't just it can't just get soft targets anymore. It can't just be easy starving, Iraqi military that's been beaten up for decades. It can't do that anymore. It actually has to go and fight and has to take losses. And the fact that Yemenis destroyed 3 of their planes or 2 of their planes, right, in an accident. This is something that terrifies the U.S. empire, because in an open war, a hot war, which it seems like the U.S. wants, like those assets are just sitting ducks, like American imperial assets in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, like all throughout those bases, right? Like this is not.
But what do you think about I totally get what you mean, and everybody keeps saying the U.S. is on its decline and China is rising and all that kind of stuff, and absolutely, I see that too. But I am genuinely very worried about the fact that the United States, and if you see the nutcases that now are already running the administration, the United States has nuclear weapons. And I don't know how you see that, but I see them crazy enough to start using them when they really see we're on the losing hand. It's just like with Israel. I think these guys are also crazy enough that if they are really threatened in their existence, to start using nuclear weapons.
I mean, they said it. It's an official policy. I think it's called Samson policy or whatever, Samson doctrine.
Yeah, Samson option.
They're going to do it. They want to do it. They're excited. And probably the Bandar Abbas port attack, was it Bandar Abbas? The port attack in Iran was probably using some kind of new, like low yield nuke or whatever they're calling it. Like that was not a normal explosion at all. And the Iranian government probably had no choice, for insurance reasons, but also for their own domestic reasons, to call it otherwise. But I mean, I'm going to say it, that it was probably an act of sabotage, and it was probably involving some kind of munition that they're saying that, like, you'll get more of these. And whatever they used in Beirut on that port attack is something that they'll use. And so that's something that I fear, that they have these things buried. And they have also, they have their option. They have submarines and stuff. Now, that's the actions of a country. I mean, and that's a suicidal country. And the fact that the lunatics are in charge of the Zionist entity and the US and their European vassal states, this is a sign of decline. I mean, you don't elect a guy who eats his own poo to, mayor of the village. Okay, you don't do that. And once you start doing that, like you're saying, okay, we are the poo eaters. Let's chow down. And like, this is a poison pill. Trade war, these are poison pill. I mean, obviously, they're trying to do something to tank the economy so they can buy the dip, as the crypto guys say. That like they want the oligarchic class that runs the US just need more because they're greedy piggies and it's never enough. And this shakedown that we just saw in the pedocracies of the Gulf, like we just saw a shakedown. It was dressed up as like, oh, they came to Trump investment, but it was a shakedown. It was a mafia shakedown. If you don't give us that money, we're going to take away your kingdoms. That's what they do. That's easy, right? Like it's just money laundering. Like that's what this whole enterprise is. This American empire machine, all of its vassal states, it's money laundering. And it's like moving things around between a small class of people. And that actually is true for other things too, like the culture industry, like the sports industry, like everything you enjoy is money laundering. And that's like something to me that is a recent kind of like, oh, goddamn. That's like, because it's basically a class of ultra wealthy people, like moving assets between each other and enjoying the fruits of their parasitic influence over our societies, laughing at us while they do it too. So that for me is something that like our own people populations both see and don't see, that they think they, especially like the libs, like the respectable citoyen of a country, they think that they participate in their countries and their whatever, and they go to this and serious and they tune in to the local news, and it's like, bro, this is artifice. We are ruled over by monsters, by vampires, by like genociders. And to go back to the previous question, in some ways the Gaza Holocaust has shown that, like, once again, that the West simply does not care about the things that it says it cares about, that it doesn't count, that they could just do Control Z whenever they want on all of their rules and just say, like, no, that doesn't count here, that doesn't count here, that doesn't count here, which has always been the case, but it's never been so naked. And so the Westoids in Iran have to now look at this and say, like, oh, because in Iran they show the violence, right? The government shows the violence. So now they have to say, oh yeah, human rights. Like, how do you be like a human rights lib in Iran now? Because that's the West, right? How do you do that if you're like a Chinese person who hates communism and you want to go out and you're, or let's say, better example, Taiwanese? Like, how are you going to do that? Like, how are you going to do that and not be like, bro? And then you show them a picture of Gaza or like somebody flattened by a tank, and our government's clapping for it. So like that rank hypocrisy is so evident now, so undeniable, thanks to the psychotic Zionist Jewish, like militants who are going insane in their militias, doing pogroms and an actual genocide and repeating it ad nauseum as genocide, being proud about it, posting their own results for their domestic audience and the world. So that, I would say, and the fact that the BBC and the Western news media isn't covering it is like, they'll never live this down. You can never point to the Western news and say, well, I'm concerned too about this thing that's happening in the Western news. Like they couldn't do, for instance, what they did in Syria 2010. What they're doing, like, and now they couldn't do that. They couldn't get away with it. Like, people would be like, what? And on top of that, they've also made their own news machine irrelevant by not showing it. So, this is over. Like, that phase of information warfare is over. And now we're in just naked, brutal suppression. And that's it. There's no velvet glove, velvet information glove, narrative glove over the iron fist of censorship. Nothing. It's like, sorry, you're gonna get deported if you tweeted about Palestine. Like, oh, you bought a ticket to California to go visit your friends? Sorry, we're gonna throw you into a concentration camp because you didn't.
Oh, you got a PhD? Not anymore.
yeah, exactly. Like, taking away, like, NYU. What sane person would go to NYU? I mean, there's gonna be plenty of kids who apply because there's only that, but. This is, you are destroying yourself. You are shitting in your own mouth. Okay, you are taking a hose and you are shoving it up your own rectum, and then you are shitting down your own throat of your institutions when you do something like this. When you like nakedly bend the knee to the most monstrous people in the world, and then on top of that, you chase after your own clients who dare to break away. Right? Like, this is something that no rational person who like wants their kids to be safe, who has like a modicum of moral conscience, would ever get themselves involved with. Now, the question is, what are the percentages here in the West of people with a moral conscience? I mean, that's the issue here, isn't it? That like, we don't know the answer to that. Is it 30? Is it 40? Is it 60? Is it 70? If it was 70, how come it doesn't show in, say, protest? How come it doesn't show in complaints to the news media? How come our population isn't showing resistance? I mean, they are resisting, but in numbers that can be easily sort of censored and hide and hidden. I mean, is that changing? Yes. I think there is going to be consequences as they ratchet up the Holocaust. I mean, what will happen, guys? What will we all do when we see the cattle cars? Like, when they're getting on the wagons? Like, what will we do? I mean, there are like
I don't know if you've heard it, Sina. Sorry for interrupting, but I heard these witness accounts on the. So there have been two major UN reports about the systematic sexual abuse of women and children, and of course also men, by the way. But mainly women and children, which gets no attention, by the way. People only defend against the false rape claims of October 7, while now for almost 2 years on an industrial scale, Palestinians have been sexually abused. I'm really, really sick of people on the pro-Palestinian side not discussing it. It's a weird taboo that really disturbs me. But I saw this testimony in the UN of I don't know, she was a lawyer or maybe a aid worker but I think it was a British or a German woman, I don't know. But literally, women and girls are literally naked, warehoused in big hangars, big halls, where they're all warehoused naked, and where Israeli citizens are visiting to just enjoy what's happening to them. So laughing at them, pointing at them, touching them, abusing them, and the most horrific sexual abuse stories you just can't imagine, the things that are happening right now. And that is not even people are talking about the bombings, people are talking about the snipings, and I totally get it. That's at least or just as horrible. But the fact that these stories of people who are currently suffering, who are currently not killed, who are currently not dead, who are literally warehoused in these concentration camps where they are tortured and sexually abused, that stuff keeps me up at night.
Yeah. I do have to say though that unfortunately I mean the reports I remember, I think I didn't actually read the reports, but I remember the clip you're talking about, and I do think it's done on purpose, obviously, because it would be something that would hit the streets in such a way. But I mean, look, in Syria they were putting Alawite women in cages and parading them around. Okay, in 2010, 11, the Yazidi. What they did to Yazidis with all kinds of backing from Western-backed forces, including like the SDF, right? Like these are all like sexual violence is a normal form of Western war. So I actually, and on top of that, here and they proudly sell the rebels in Syria as some sort of freedom agents, right? Like it's like breaking free from the prisons. They had this whole fake Bastille Day that they celebrated through CNN. Like so, I actually disagree with you that like this is that's not like out beyond the range of possibility. But
I always say that's a kind of bias we also have in the West. That, at least that is talked about when it comes to Syria or Libya. Then suddenly you can talk about sexual slavery and that kind of stuff and slave markets, and that's a kind of Orientalist stereotype that people
that's
accept.
true too.
But nobody is talking
true.
about the systematic industrial level that is happening in Israel right now.
No, yeah, I mean, I have seen articles. I've seen a few. I'll find them. There is, but it's not. It's you. I agree with you, right? That it's not the scandal that it should be. It's just that we're watching so many scandals, and on top of that, they're smarter in hiding that this time. It's not like the other torture dungeons where I think personally they want videos to get out to a degree to send a message to as a kind of warfare, but they don't want videos to get out, all the videos to get out because they want that terror to be localized, but also that's for their own domestic consumption because Zionists are like a rabid beast and they need to consume flesh. And they're just like any other genocidal monsters. They want to eat their enemies alive and show them how much dominance they have. So that's like, this is imperial warfare, I find. I mean, we only know about My Lai, but in Vietnam, right? And how before they murdered that village, they raped them. They gang raped all the women, right? Including children. And so like, that's something that we only know, but we don't know all of the other stories of all the other villagers that happened there in Vietnam and then beyond. Same with Iraq. We only have a handful of stories. Like they murdered incredible numbers of people, probably in the tens of millions by now since the 9/11 war. And some of it's official and some of it's unofficial. And yet you only that like it will never be imaginable for us, the scale of this violence, of this Western savagery and its principal goon, that state, namely Zionism, the Zionist entity, that it's used as like the most violent, horrendous crimes, and then they celebrate it, right? They use it as a basis of their own community formation. I mean, if that doesn't tell you like what Zionism is and Western imperialism is, like I don't know. I mean, you can draw a line from like Zionists celebrating, outside of the torture dungeon, because some like the prison dungeon, I can't remember, it's like seditism, I don't know how to say it. It's spelled STE or something. That's
daytime.
Yeah, exactly. Like they had a riot when a few of them got arrested from there symbolically, and then they were let go, right? And so this is not like, this is for their own community formation. But think about that. The only thing keeping them together as a cohesive project is the violence they are doing as a society to their enemies. And that to me is like, yo, wrap this shit up. It's done. You guys are cooked. Because if this is all you have, then like, okay, like enjoy this, enjoy the bloodbath that you're enjoying, because it will come back to you. It will certainly come back to you. And you are now the most hated country around the world by the most amount of people. Everybody, the people around the world, like, you cannot live like this. You cannot be so hated around the world. And Zionists will hear that and they'll say, oh, we're used to it. We've always been hated. Come on.
What do you say about, so we and I totally agree with you. We the whole world can see now the absolute total depravity of the Zionists and in the Zionist state. And how would you explain that despite this total absolute depravity, almost every Western government keeps supporting it? You know what I mean?
Why wouldn't they? It's their job. That's what they do. This is one system. This is one imperial system. It works together in lockstep. Okay, it's curated from, it has different curation centers, different nodal relations. There's one in Washington, one in New York, one in LA. They have different, for different projects. They have subcontractors on the European continent. They have, like treasured sort of contractors in all of the different regions. Like they have a whole island dedicated to it in Taiwan. Like, it's like, this is how the West works. It's a machine. But here's the thing. It's a machine. It has to work. It's a big, complicated machine. It has multiple parts. It's like this crazy contraption that, like, like what Doc Brown did at the third Back to the Future movie with making ice. Like, immense amount of action has to go in to create very little actual of consequence in terms of power, right? So they have immense input. That input is no longer what it used to be. They can't control the vassal states. There's other forces that are creating an alternate world. And on top of that, they've alienated their own world to the point where Canadians aren't going to the US. Okay, if that is happening to you, like Canadians are like too afraid to go cross this border, right? Their own like client states, citizens of their own client state above them don't even want to go and visit all the sites that are sold to us as the most amazing thing. Even with all their soft power, you can't convince Canadians to do that. Now, will that change if Abu Naranha leaves office and they put some milquetoast liberal in, the way they did with like the Obama-Bush swap? Maybe, I don't know, that changed a little bit. That might be enough for the brain dead liberals. But right as of now, in Canada, the story in Canada too is that we were headed for a right-wing route. Okay, we were headed for that. It was going to be a good old-fashioned kotek, as me and my Iranian friends used to say in school, a beatdown. And because of the conservative party's like ass eating of Trump, because that's what those chuds do. That when Trump started laughing about Canadian sovereignty and be like, oh, you're our 51st state, for no reason, just because his own like McDonald's fueled brain likes it and he likes the attention, like this had serious consequences. And then on top of that, he then sets up the stage for this tariff war, which in Canada is a little fake. It's real, but it's like, this is not that even if you can't even if you can alienate your own vassals, right? Like this is not going to work. It's not going to keep working. The U.S. has been downgraded. Its economic rating or whatever by Moody's. The Moody's downgrade recently. Like you can only print money so far. Eventually, people won't take your print money. And on top of that, China has been divesting, creating a different world. I mean, I always say this on different shows, is that they overuse the weapon that they perfected on us, which is to say Iran, which is to say a siege warfare. is that that siege and the use of sanctions could work on a smallish country like Iran, but it didn't work on Russia. I mean, it worked to an extent, but it certainly won't work on China. And if anything, it will hurt you more than if it doesn't. And so this tariff that has been causing so much chaos in like just simple retail settings in the US, this has tanked his own base, his base. Like the MAGA chuds are too embarrassed to be like, oh yeah, this guy fucking hates our whole class and just sees us as like pigs that he can like raid and he can like, eat our pork bellies. And like, that's it. Like, that's the ruling class.
Israel. He is cucked
Yeah,
by Israel.
exactly. Publicly, gleefully holding out Netanyahu's chair. And, it's not, and I still say this. I feel that the resistance probably came to the determination that something like this would unfold, that the response to Al-Aqsa flood would be so insane, would be so unhinged, to use the internet lexicon, that it would bring about societal changes that were destructive to their own society, because the push-pull between different forces in our own Western world of reactionary versus liberal voices, right? Even though they're in sync in the foreign policy sphere, they're not in sync in the domestic sphere. And so to grind those gears together and to keep like forcing your action figures to fight each other, like eventually you're going to drop one, and like there's going to be consequences to that. And so this unraveling of the Western order, which the US seems to be cheering on and accelerating, I think it's a response to the decline of America's importance on the stage, that it's something that is a symptom of a wider malady, which is like the US is not the power it once was. And the Zionists know this. And so they're making one last insane dash to the final, impossible final goal of greater Israel. So that they're trying to sort of do that through Syria. They're trying to dominate Lebanon. They're obviously trying to ethnically cleanse and genocide Gaza and sort of take all that. But that, the end game for them is not victory, it's the status quo. And that status quo is over. Right? They can't be the high-tech economy they once were. They're not even going to make sure if their planes are going to land because of the Yemenis. So that's the sort of the fly in the ointment that I've been sort of talking about in my recent shows of the resistance strategy, is to ruin their project and to make it untenable for them. And then the punishment is what you see in Gaza. The punishment for that is what you see in South Lebanon. That's something that I've been trying to kind of push for, a kind of reading, because it's tempting to look at the lack of destruction in Israel, which of course they hide. They hide the fact that their settlers from the north have been displaced. They live in hotels. They don't show the lack of social cohesion, and the fact that, okay, between living in a hotel or going back to the place where you're from, where you're comfortable, where you have all these, where you also have privileges and a passport, and it doesn't have sirens wailing, and like it's not some besieged ethno state that's hated by everyone around it. Like you're gonna eventually you're gonna lose your people, and that decline in support of their own base is also, I imagine, what the resistance took into account when doing the calculations on Al-Aqsa flood. And then I'll also say is that we have to remember in this historical context that the whole Oslo charade and the subsequent defeat of the Intifada in the West Bank, right, that took place in the years following it, and the assassination and the coup in the Palestinian Authority, and the rise of a violent Palestinian carpador class, and the NGOification of the West Bank, to the point where that you have these Palestinian ruling elites saying, like, Hamas, lay down your arms, which is to say that Israel is doing their dirty work, right? This is now that they're letting Zionists do their dirty work of defeating their own enemies. And how did that come about? Because Hamas decided to go for it in the 2000s, to say, we're not going to let Fatah rule this anymore, because clearly they're compromised. And that consequence of Oslo, and then the subsequent victory of Hamas in what could be called a Palestinian civil war in Gaza, and the subsequent victory of them in the elections in 2005, and then the siege that was immediately put on that government, right? Like these were tectonic shifts that I certainly didn't recognize at the time. I was just a baby, but I didn't see it unfolding. Now, of course, and who played a huge role in this, which was the Axis, which was Hezbollah, Imad Mughniya specifically, and the IRGC, and a whole bunch of different actors, including Qasem Soleimani, who then devised and helped construct, not physically, but helped provide the materials that Palestinians can themselves construct this tunnel system that is vast, that is keeping them, and that has also been a source of weapons and getting into and sort of smuggling weapons into the Gaza Strip, such to the point, and on top of that, the precursor materials to create those weapons and those rockets that who then have been such a thorn in the side of the Zionist entity because it ruined their equanimity, right? They need peace. They need peace and quiet. They need to have total surrender. Right. And the fact that they were getting that in the West Bank, more or less, with notable exceptions, and notable exceptions to the point because that's why they needed like a violent Palestinian security voice as forces, like, to the extent of like, I think 60,000, I think that's like the police, the size of the UN, the sort of Palestinian Authority police force. That they need to suppress that violence and monitor it and do the work of them. And then even then, when it doesn't work, the Israeli army comes in and punishes them for any kind of resistance because the youth still choose to rebel. The youth are still stoning, right? Like they're not stopping that. And on top of that, there's still armed resistance, less. But the story of Gaza is one of this is a growth of a certain kind of military power and an ability to inflict a kind of deterrent on your enemy to the point where Al-Aqsa flood succeeded in exposing how weak the control was at the border and how their arrogance in getting so close to the border, right? Because that's arrogance, right? That's you saying, I control you, I keep watch over you, and I'm going to move my people closer and closer to you. We're going to encroach upon you. But the cost of that is you expose yourself to those people. And then we saw the consequences of that on October 7th in this commando operation. And so the consequence to that commando operation, to make their enemy forces so deranged and to make them do the thing that they've wanted to do for a long time, but didn't have the pretext to do it, right? Which is release the hostages, which is to say, do a genocide and ethnic cleansing in the name of releasing the hostages, whom they're killing more and more of. And they're also killed those people on October 7th. Obviously, we know now that Israel was the main combatant, in fact, on October 7th, the IDF, against their own people, mind you, because of the Hannibal Doctrine. And these are all tectonic shifts that I certainly didn't see, as I said. But we're seeing now the consequences. So 20 years ago, Hamas took over Gaza. And they started setting up the base of a resistance. And we're watching that now. And the punishment for that resistance is the ethnocide and the genocide. And so and the role of the Axis in all of this, in helping provide the materials and the know-how, it's the teach a man to fish, or the example that I use is a little more, let's say, cultivated. I'm just joking when I say that, but I like to say that it's Promethean, that it's a Promethean force, that the Axis was, and specifically Iran and its IRGC sort of, external force, who then gave this kind of power and missile power to Hezbollah first, and then later to Yemen and to the Gaza resistance as well. So this is something that's really big, and I think we do the favor of the imperialists when we isolate them. That we isolate these fronts and we don't see the wider connective tissue linking together this kind of, resistance corpus that is as active right now and inflicting actual sort of strategic damage on the entity, if not militarily, but also, if you can't see the military side, but you can see it in terms of drawing, hitting them in their pressure points, which is their ability to circulate freely around the world, right? Which is what Zionists control over their enemies, because their enemies are besieged, right? Physically, in some cases, physically and economically in some cases, but sometimes economically in other cases, just economically, right? And so this is returning that to the entity has been one of the main one of the ways tools that the resistance has used, right, to make it impossible for them to be the Western country they need to be to keep going. Because who are you going to get to come live with you, man? There's not that many Ethiopian Jews. You can only fly so many. It's the West. It's Westoid Jews who are their main backers, and they're Christian psychotic Zionists who need to come and do Aliyah. Not the latter, not the Zionists, Christian Zionists. They don't want Christians, but they want Jews. And most of them live in the U.S., and some of them go back and forth, but they can't. And they use it as a kind of pied-a-terre and, a place to go and do, go and have a nice summer and maybe meet a girlfriend, have a summer love, but can't run a country because it's a summer camp. Sorry. Your people going to have to come and invest someday.
Well, not only Westoid Jews. Also lots of Russians and Eastern Europeans, as long as they're white. As long as they're white, that's it.
And that was one of the tools of was one of the consequences of the Ukraine war. I still believe that was one of the reasons that the neocons, egged this war on, was to help displace people from and into the entity. And there has been a huge boost to the entity since this war started from Ukrainian migration. Obviously, we know that the collapse of the Soviet Union was also a boost, a human boost, which is to say, to the entity. But these come at a cost too, guys. You can't stitch your society together from a bunch of different people coming from vastly different places. Like, who's
not
the
even
doofus?
The EU works.
Yeah, and on top of that, who's to say that like Russian Ukrainian Zionists want to get along with, or sort of want to get along with, or Russian Zionists want to get along with Ukrainian Zionists? Like, who's to say? And a ton of them don't learn Hebrew; they just stay in Russian. So now you have pockets of their population, and remember, the English-speaking ones who boast about it so much here, who live most of their lives here, they don't learn Hebrew. They can't learn languages. They're Westoids. Okay, Westoids, Anglophone Westoids don't learn languages, okay? The world comes to them, okay? But you can't go live in Israel. I mean, you can live in Israel speaking English, but you definitely feel more alone, man. You definitely don't feel like the vibe that you got online, especially when you have this insanely racist society.
Why do you think, Sina, why do you think that the Hebrew they're speaking right now in Israel just sounds like Europeans who try to speak a Middle Eastern language? Because they started to try to speak the language again, but they imported their horrible European accents. So I always think it's like Dutch people just trying to speak a Middle Eastern language. It's ridiculous.
Yes. No, that's actually a good point. I mean, I don't know Hebrew well enough to identify the mix. I do know that there's a story of like the reason why they say Hamas is because they can't do the ha.
Exactly.
That we have.
Exactly.
We have a
harikat.
Harikat al-Muslim. What is it? Harikat al-Muslimiyya al-Islamiyya or something? No. Islamic. Oh, Muqawama. It's like Harikat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya or something like that. That's Hamas. That's like and they can't do the Harikat. They can't do the Ain. Right? I think they have an equivalent. And all their Semitic philo-Semitism, their obsession with their own Semitic origins, they're fucking Westoids, man. You are a doofus from Massachusetts, okay? You are from New Jersey. Who are you fooling? You can't, here's the root of it. I mean, at least I think, is that they're already settler colonials. They're already colonizing a country. You can't colonize two countries at once. They're colonizing the U.S. They're continuing an ongoing, or wherever they are in their Westoid country. I mean, that's an ongoing colonization project. You have to pick one, okay? You can't have it all. You can't, you have to go and pick one. You have to invest. You have to make your life. You have to raise your kids, find a career, do all that shit, go to school, being an annoying loser, donate your money to the fake charity that's money laundering. To do that thing, you have to set up that life. And you either do that in Israel or you do that in the West. And there's no mixing of the two. Okay, you can't, I don't care. Okay, maybe if you're super rich, if you're that jerk off fucking Adam Newman from WeWork or whatever, maybe you can have this kind of, bifurcated life. But not everybody's a fucking billionaire, man. Not everybody can afford that. They have to be a fucking working Joe. And so what did they do? The Zionists grease the rails for themselves. And they say, oh, come have this nice life, have full health care, live better than you will in your trashy country of origin, right? That you're treated like a horrible, like a second-class citizen, which is like a Zionist lie that it tells around the world, because Zionists are ultimately the most anti-Semitic people on the planet, because they have this fucking ingrained view that we belong nowhere but Palestine. And that's like an insanely racist view of themselves, to say that you belong nowhere. Excuse me? You belong where you were born, where your people are from. Excuse me? Go back to fucking Poland.
plus the fact that they of course discriminate against real Semites, and also Semites among themselves, because what we were just saying about those European accents and that Europeanized kind of Hebrew that you heard. I don't know who that was who said that. I think maybe it was when we talked to Alon Mizrahi. I'm not sure, but that even that kind of Europeanized kind of Hebrew that you hear has become a colonial a marker of status. That is, that those Jews who speak with those throat sounds and more like the
Who were raised
original
there? Who were raised there? Yeah.
Semitic languages,
Yeah.
those are discriminated because they sound like Arab. They sound like
exactly.
Arab.
Yeah. Their own racism will be their downfall, I swear. I know that's like some humanistic bullshit at a certain point. I know, and like my Marxist, the inner, like my Stalin inside of me is like is trying to reach out and climb through my throat and beat me with a bat. But I firmly believe this humanist ideal of when you shit down your own throat, like socially, that when you like consume your own waste, that which is what Zionists do when they're so racist, when they eat the worst excrement of human life, right, which is racism and chauvinism, when they just consume that, like you are mad hattering your brain. This is mercury poisoning. Like this is something that it will scare your children away, that you will alienate your own next of kin, that it will split up your own family, that your kids won't speak to you, that like your kids who are more clued in, who are on the internet more than you, who haven't been marinating in Zionist bullshit for decades and decades. I mean, maybe they have and they were resistant to it, probably because Palestinians have so assiduously shown their own lives and have underscored their own, what crimes are committed against them, and you couldn't keep it from them. So there is this humanist in me that thinks that this scale of injustice can't sustain itself, that this Zionist beast is its own worst enemy at a certain historical juncture, that it will start to feel the way, and it already has. And I think that the tools that the resistance have used against them have very correctly pinpointed the places where you can cut them off. That like if you sever these ties to the West, then this vicious monstrosity European pine tree planted in the middle of a cedar forest, and like that you can cut it off, and it will die, and it will be slow, and maybe and in its death, in sensing its own death, starts to hack at its own roots, right? Which is kind of what we're seeing, right? That their own undoing, and they've reached a point where the genocidal hate that they need to cultivate to keep their own base pure, to keep their own triumph of the will going, that spoils future recruits. That this is now poison to their own. Who's going to go and want us? Like what? I mean, like I saw a tweet the other day from Vietnamese, because the Vietnamese provide a labor force to the Israelis, that like this third world labor force, that Westoids, because Westoids are too good to clean their own shit and to like do their own work, so they import people from the global South. Americans do it, Canadians do it, Dutch do it. It's the treasured tradition of the Westoid world, of importing your own racial underclass to do your dirty work. What sane Thai person would go there? I mean, maybe there are a few. You can bribe them enough, but they're going to get treated like shit. They know it. Israeli society is so racist. I mean, they shoot their own thinking that they're Arabs. Like they do like the Spider-Man meme of pointing, saying "Death to Arabs, death to Arabs," and they're doing it to themselves. I mean, if that's not like a metaphor for this project, I don't know, guys.
Well, if that makes you feel too idealistic, saying that, just think, 30, 40 years ago, you had people saying the same thing about South Africa, and people might have poo-pooed that and said, the fact that they're a pariah state and everyone is disgusted by their racism doesn't mean that the state will collapse. But that is what happened in the end.
Now, I mean, I've always had this quibble, which is to say, like the what is it? It's not the correlation isn't causation, but like the same characteristics don't display the same malady. Like the same symptoms don't necessarily come from the same disease. The West, I cannot see the West decoupling from the entity by choice, the way they did with South Africa. Where they did, how much of a choice did they have versus like that? The actual South African like country was the apartheid system was declining. I don't know. The Zionist, like the dream of the Zionist entity to avoid that is to just do pure ethnic cleansing, which is what we're seeing in Gaza, which is what we're seeing in the West Bank. They're hoping to avoid that fate of correcting what their racist way of saying demographic imbalance, demographic bomb. Like they've been talking like this for decades now for a reason, because they know that their numbers are dwindling and the ratio of their numbers to their enemy numbers is a big problem for them, which is why Gaza presents them with an opportunity to cut down that to do that math, right? Like these are monsters. So I'm using genocidal monstrous language, okay? So don't get me wrong here. But the thing is, though, is that like they are also so small in number, and actual people who are willing to do the work of their country is so small that it takes all this bullshit artifice to keep it going. And I think that's over. They can't be the economy they used to be. They can't have the colonial mentality of going to the far-flung corners of the land and settling. They can do that to the West Bank still, of course, but what do they need to keep that going? They need an army that's fully engaged, right, at all times and driving around, right? They also need a comprador military force to keep that, a police force to keep that system in check. And then to keep that comprador police force in check, you need a comprador government in check. And to keep that government alive, you have to feed it with all of your other vassal states called the Qataris, right, and the Saudis, who provide.
That's why they're killing them all.
Exactly.
That's why they're killing them all.
This is how this violence works. And I've said this a lot. Like, they can't spin this many plates at once. You can't. It's not, especially when you have this beast. This Zionist beast, which wants to escalate, which needs to escalate to keep its own, desire for, for consuming the flesh of their fucking enemies, because they love to fucking see it. They love to fucking enjoy it, which is an imperialist thing. It's not just like a Zionist thing. Like imperialists need to see their beings vanquished. And to keep that machine going, you have to dedicate a huge amount of your resources. So this is a war of attrition, guys. It's a war of attrition. This is what it means. It doesn't mean one-to-one. Oh, you bomb our embassy, we bomb yours. It's not one-to-one.
Well, let's hope that it will end soon. But at least I agree with you. I mean, it's at least it's the beginning of the end, so to speak. I always say when we talk about the American empire will fall and this and that, I always say the moment Chinese students and other global South students don't want to go to Ivy League schools anymore, but rather stay home, that's the moment empire is gone. Seriously, that's the moment that whole narrative, that fantasy is gone. So what I always say. And as long as people still want to fly to the country to indoctrinate themselves with imperialist propaganda at all these stupid Ivy League schools, then it still works. The kind of indoctrination, the colonial mentality still works. You know what I mean? Anyway, Sina, you have been very generous with your time, and we could actually keep on speaking were it not so late. But I hope we can do this again in the future.
Yeah.
This was fantastic, man. It was really, really good. I love it.
No, thank you guys. Thank you guys. I enjoyed it too. And you guys are welcome on my show anytime.
حبيت القمر طلع القمر اصطناعي شميت الورد طلع الورد بلاستيكي انا حبيت القمر طلع القمر اصطناعي شميت الورد طلع الورد بلاستيكي تكتيكي تكتيكي